Welcome to World History, Unit 3, Lesson 3, Feudalism and Manorialism. Our essential question today: what were the reasons for the emergence of feudalism and the development of the manor economy and political system? Our agenda is to demonstrate an understanding of the social, political, and economic influence of the Roman Catholic Church in medieval Europe. Let's begin. Feudalism and manorialism are very important in European history, Western history, and Western culture. There's also feudalism in societies like Japan in the East. What is feudalism? Feudalism is a political and economic system based on land holding and protective alliances emerging in Europe. Invaders attack the Western European areas. Let's talk about that first. The Vikings invade the north in Europe, and they are warlike people who raid the European areas from Scandinavia, which is Denmark, Sweden, Norway, um, and there's two more: Iceland, and there is Finland. However, we're going to speak specifically for Denmark and Norway and Sweden at this time. The Viking longships sail in shallow water so they can go into the river deltas from the ocean and go into the inland areas. So they were able to attack inland from the river because their ships sail in shallow waters. Eventually, many Vikings adopted Christianity and become farmers. The Magyars and the Muslims attack the east and south. The Magyars, or Hungarian nomads, invade Western Europe in the late 800s, and the Muslims strike north from Africa, attacking through Italy and Spain. The Vikings, the Magyars, and the Muslims invasions caused widespread disorder and suffering in Europe during the Roman Empire, but eventually this Roman Empire falls basically through it implodes because of the three reasons that we spoke of during the Roman Empire section: um, poor leadership, inflation, and invasions. And these invasions included the Vikings, the Magyars, and the Muslims in those areas. Feudalism structures in society in 850 to 950, feudalism emerges, which is a political system based on land control. A lord or a landowner gives fiefs or land grants in exchange for services. Vassals are the people who receive the fiefs, and they become powerful landholders. The feudal pyramid shows the power in the feudal system is much like a pyramid with the king at the top. The king served by nobles, and they were served by knights, who are also served by knights. So the peasants are at the bottom. The knights, the horsemen that defend the lord and the land, they exchange that service for fiefs. Social classes are well defined. The medieval feudal system classifies people into three social groups: those who fight, nobles and knights; those who pray, monks, nuns, leaders of the church; and those who work, peasants. Social class is usually inherited, and majority of the people are peasants. Most peasants are serfs. Serfs are people who lawfully are bound to the place of birth. Serfs aren't slaves, but what they produce belongs to their lord. And the difference between a serf and a slave is that the serf is a part of the land and cannot be sold to another neighbor or person or area, that serf stays on that land perpetually throughout his life or her life. Manners and the economic side of feudalism. So here's a picture of the pyramid. You have the king at the top, then the lords, then the knights, then the peasants and serfs. It becomes like a web when sometimes the knights become kings and the knights become lords, or the serfs or peasants um, uh, end up becoming knights and then lords. So can become kind of complicated. The lord's estate is a manor. This manor has an economic system or manor system. And the reason why the manor has an economic system is because the landlord or the landowner uses the land to farm and to make money from the farm. The serfs and free peasants maintain the lord's estate and give grain. The lord provides housing, farmland, and protection from bandits. A self contained world. Medieval manors include a lord's house, a church, a workshop, and a village. Manors cover a few square miles of land and are largely self sufficient. New tools for farmers. People invented new tools for farming, and they include metal horseshoes and pitchforks, and new types of harnesses were all developed. The harshness of manor life. Peasants pay taxes to use the mill and the bakery. Now, let that sink in. Peasants pay taxes to use the mill and the bakery, and they pay a tithe to the priest. So if the land belongs to the Lord and the peasants belong to the Lord, and the peasants have to mill the grain that's grown on the Lord's land, why do they have to pay taxes to use the mill and the bakery when they're going to give the grain to the Lord anyway? Good question, huh? The tithe is a church tax. It's equal to 1/10 of the peasant's income. The serfs live in crowded cottages with dirt floors, straw for beds, and the daily grind of raising crops, livestock, feeding, and clothing family are a lot on the peasant family. The poor diet equals illness, malnutrition, and then it makes life expectancy about 35 years for the peasants. They can't, it's too much for them. The serfs generally accept their lives as part of God's plan. Here's a picture of a manor house or a manor area. The code of chivalry for knights glorified both combat and romantic love. The technology of warfare changes. Leather saddles and stirrups enable knights to handle heavy weapons. In the 700s, mounted knights become most important part of an army. The warrior's role in the feudal system. By 1100s, the Western Europe is a battleground of warring nobles. Feudal lords raised private armies of knights, and knights are rewarded with land, and this provides income needed for weapons because, of course, they use the land to raise animals and farm, and use that to make money from. The knights' other activities help train them for combat. By 1100s, the knights obey the code of chivalry, a set of ideals on how to act. They are to protect the weak and poor, serve the feudal lord, God, and chosen lady. A knight's training. The boys begin to train for knighthood at age 7. Usually they are knighted at age 21. The knights gain experience in local wars and tournaments, which are mock battles. Brutal reality of warfare. Castles are huge fortresses where lords live. Attacking armies used a wide range of strategies and weapons to attack these castles and huge fortresses. Epic poetry. Epic poems recount a hero's deeds and adventures. The Song of Roland is about Charlemagne's knight fighting Muslims. The love poems and songs that were very important to this period. The knight's duties to ladies are as important as those to their lords. Troubadours, traveling musicians, write and sing short verses. Most celebrated women of the age, as such as Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor's son, Richard the Lionhearted, also wrote songs and poems. And remember, we talked about Richard the Lionhearted in the Crusade episode. Women's role in feudal society. According to the church and the feudal society, women are inferior to men. The noble women can inherit land and defend the castle and send knights to war on the Lord's request, usually confined to activities of the home or or convent. Uh, Peasant women, for example, had the most labor in the home and field, and they bear children and provide for family. Poor, powerless women do household tasks at a young age. All right, now we're going to talk about Unit 4, Lesson 1, the Renaissance. And we're going to connect these two because they both happened in the Middle Ages. Our central question for this section: what were some of the social and cultural changes that led to the rise of the Renaissance in Europe? Our agenda is to understand how the recovery at the end of the Middle Ages led to the rebirth of culture in Europe. Let's continue. Rebirth of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a rebirth of learning and art. Now, we always hear them say Renaissance is a rebirth um, of learning and art, but it's a rebirth. How did it get reborn? From the Crusades. When the Europeans went to the Middle East for the Crusades, they found the libraries in the Muslim areas with the old ancient Roman and ancient Greek texts that were lost during the fall of Rome. The Europeans copied these texts from the libraries. No, they did not take the originals out of the Muslim libraries because remember, they only won the first crusade and therefore they didn't have the authority to take things out of the Muslim libraries, so they copied them. Once they copied them, they took those articles up to Europe, and that's how the old style of making art and sculptures and architecture and theater grew. And it's important for you to know how the Renaissance started, and it's because of the Crusades. All right, because nothing in history happens in a vacuum. A time of change. After war and plague during the Middle Ages, people celebrated the human spirit. People began questioning medieval institutions And the Renaissance was an explosion of creativity in art, writing, and thought. And it started um, in northern Italy and it lasted from 1300 to 1600. Shifts in society. Smaller populations by 1450 led to a higher standard of living. Basic education provided provided in most towns. Universities developed. Basic education in most areas and towns was very important. Middle classes created by people who were merchants, bankers, and tradespeople. Universities also developed. New sources of knowledge. Scholars are knowledgeable of the classical Greek works, fled to Italy. Greek texts preserved in the libraries of Islamic Empire, and Greek texts translated into Latin, and Western scholars studied these works. This is where all of the new sources come from. And remember, I said during the Crusades, a lot of them got this information from the libraries in the Middle East. New technology. Western Europeans learned how to make paper, contributed to the growth of libraries, and made development of printing possible. A changing political landscape. Europe experienced a period of peace. The rise of Italian city states also became important. Italy became more urban and commercial than the rest of Europe. Cities were breeding ground for intellectual revolution. Economic factors rose because the Crusades spurred trade. And again, there you go with the Crusades being an influence on the Renaissance. The economic growth of the city states in northern Italy was very important, and in the 1300s, the bubonic plague killed 60% of the population, disrupting the economy. Political factors. Italy remained politically fragmented. The urban nobility married with commercial families. They established vital independent bases in Italian cities. Venice grew into an international powerhouse, and trade during the Crusades brought wealth to the city, and it also became a Mediterranean empire. Milan became a center of manufacturing and experienced artistic creativity and public building. It also experienced frequent warfare. Naples was a flourishing independent city state until the 1130s. Series of invasions disrupted Naples, and so Naples prospered under the Angevin dynasty, but the earthquakes and Black Death in the 1340s hindered its prosperity. Florence became a banking city, and the banking family called the Medicis controlled Florence. And starting in 1434, Cosmo de' Medici becomes Florence's dictator for 30 years. In 1469, Lorenzo de' Medici ruled as a dictator. And the Medicis eventually become the Habsburgs of Austria, and they intermarry with each other and they die out, but it takes a long time. In Rome, in 1143, Rome became a self governing city with a republican constitution. The classics lead to humanism, and humanism is an intellectual movement focused on human achievements. Humanists studied classical texts, history, literature, and philosophy. Worldly pleasures during the Renaissance society was called secularism, and secular means worldly. Wealthy people enjoyed fine food, homes, and clothing. Patrons of the art. A patron is a financial supporter of arts or artists. Church leaders spend money on artworks to beautify cities. Wealthy merchants also patrons of the arts. The Renaissance man is a type of description of a person who excels in many fields, including the classics, art, politics, and combat. And there are different people who rose to this ideal of a Renaissance man, including Leonardo da Vinci. But also here, this textbook notes that Baldassare Castellani was a Renaissance man. He wrote a book called The Courtier. The book teaches how to become a universal person. A Renaissance woman is an upper class, educated woman, educated in the classics, and she's charming. She's expected to inspire art, but not create it. Isabella d'Este, a patron of the arts, wields power in Monteo. The Italian Renaissance was a rediscovery of learning that produced many great works of art and literature. Artists in the Italian Renaissance include Michelangelo, and these artists use realistic styles copied from classical art and often to portray religious subjects. Painters use perspective, a way to show three dimensions on canvas, and you see the shadows that they use. Michelangelo was very important because he used a realistic style when depicting the human body, and Donatello revived the classical form in sculpture. Leonardo da Vinci, a Renaissance man himself, we just talked about him, was a painter, a sculptor, an inventor, and a scientist. He paints one of the best known portraits in the world, the Mona Lisa. Famous religious paintings include The Last Supper, which are also painted by Leonardo da Vinci, and you see it here. It's actually a wall, so it's kind of maybe difficult to capture the real essence of it, but this is the painting. Raphael advances realism, and he's famous for his use of perspective. His favorite subject, the Madonna and Child, and the famous painting School of Athens are very, very important in Renaissance history. Sophronisba Angosusla was the first woman artist to gain world renown, and also Artemisia Gentileschi paints strong, heroic women. Italian Renaissance architecture features classical Roman forms such as columns and domes. Filippo Brunelleschi fused classical with Romanesque style. Andrea, Andrea Palladio wrote influential book that rules and plans for buildings. The patriarch and Bosisio the patriarch was humanist and poet, and a woman named Laura was his muse. Bosisio is also best known for the Decameron, a series of stories. Niccolo Machiavelli was an author of political guidebook The Prince, and The Prince examines how rulers can gain and keep power. Victoria Colina was a woman writer with great influence, and her poems expressed personal emotion. By the 1400s, the ideas of the Italian Renaissance began to spread to the northern European areas. The Northern Renaissance begins. The spirit of the Renaissance in Italy impresses visitors from Northern Europe. When a Hundred Years' War ends in 1453, the cities grow rapidly, and merchants in northern cities grow wealthy and sponsor artists. England and France unify under strong monarchs who are art patrons, and Northern Renaissance artists interested in the realism also grew. Humanists interested in social reform based on Judeo Christian values also were important. Writers moved to Northern Europe to flee the war in Italy in 1494. Painters from Germany, such as Albrecht Dürer, his woodcuts and engravings emphasize realism. And here's a picture of him at the side. Hans Holbein, the younger, paints portraits often of English royalty. Flemish painters in Flanders is the artistic center of Northern Europe. Jan van Eyck is a pioneer of oil painted paintings using layers of paint. Van Eyck's paintings are realistic and reveal the subject's personality. Peter Bruegel captures the scenes of peasant life with realistic details. The Northern writers tried to reform society. They criticized the Catholic Church and start Christian humanism. They want to reform society and promote education, particularly for women. Christian humorists include people like Desiderius Erasmus of Holland, and he's best known Christian humanist. His book, The Praise of Folly, pokes fun at merchants and priests. Thomas More of England creates a model society in his book Utopia. And utopia means no place in Greek, but it has come to mean an ideal place. Christine de Pizan is one of the first women writers. She promotes education and equal treatment for boys and girls. The Elizabethan Age. The Renaissance spreads to England in the 1500s. This period is known as the Elizabethan Age, and it's named after Queen Elizabeth I, which is pictured. She's pictured here. Elizabeth reigns from 1558 to 1603. William Shakespeare is often regarded as the greatest playwright. He was born in Stratford upon Avon in 1564, and his plays performed at the London's Globe Theatre. Around 1045, Bi Xiang of China invents the movable type. It also uses a separate piece of type for each character. Gutenberg improves the printing press, and around 1440, Johann Gutenberg of Germany develops the printing press. His printing press allows for quick, cheap book production, and the first book printed with movable type is the Gutenberg Bible in 1455. The Renaissance was a period of striking achievements in many areas. The changes in art include art influenced by the classical Greek and Rome, and realistic portrayals of individuals and nature. Art is both secular and religious. Writers use vernacular, which is the common tongue, and the art praises individual achievements. Changes in literature include the writer's use of vernacular, which is their native language or common tongue, and the self expression or to portray individuality of the subject. Changes in architecture include the Renaissance design used to ration and proportions and balanced and proportioned balance during the in architecture. Classical style spread to France, Russia, and Spain and blended with local traditions. The changes in society. Printing makes information widely available, and illiterate people benefit from having books read to them. Published accounts of maps and charts lead to more discoveries. Published legal proceedings make rights clearer to people. Political structures and religious practices are also questioned during this time. The spirit of inquiry. Questioning an attitude of the Renaissance, this led to skepticism, which means people questioned everything. Skepticism helped the development of the scientific method, and it transformed medicine, physics, and other branches of science. People questioned religion and faith, and they increased curiosity about the world. This led to the age of exploration. All right. So remember your essential questions from the beginning, and you may pause the video and look at the different vocabulary words within this section and the section on feudalism and manorialism.